You know what they say. Early bird gets the ultimate vacation home. Book early and save over $120 with Vrbo. Because early gets you closer to the action, whether it's waves lapping at the shore or snoozing in a hammock that overlooks, well, whatever you want it to. So you can all enjoy the payoff come summer with Vrbo's early booking deals. Rise and shine. Average savings $141. Select homes only.
The Bleacher Report app is your destination for sports. Right now, the NBA's heating up, March Madness is here, and MLB is almost back. Every day there's a new headline, a new highlight, a new moment you've got to see for yourself. That's why I stay locked in with the Bleacher Report app. For me, it's about staying connected to my sports. I can follow the teams I care about, get real-time scores, breaking news, and highlights all in one place. Download the Bleacher Report app today so you never miss a moment.
Hi, I'm Anya, and today we are going to talk about the high-profile murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, and the case against Luigi Mangione, the young man accused of murdering him. Content warning, this episode contains discussion of violence and murder. So, this is a case that we have not really touched upon too much on the murder sheet yet. Is that fair to say, Kevin?
That's definitely fair to say.
This murder occurred in New York City on December 4th, 2024, so it's relatively recent. It has sparked an enormous amount of media attention, and it's a case that you and I have long talked about behind the scenes and been interested in covering. And today what we're going to do is just really do a primer on the case. This is just about us getting started on it. It's about sort of introducing our audience to some of the key figures, the key concepts, the key issues at play here. And we're going to be doing so in just a way that's kind of getting us started. And then we'd be really interested in hearing from all of you if there are issues with the case that you'd like to know more about, whether that's evidence or legal issues or narratives that are forming online and wanting to assess whether those are accurate or fair or inaccurate and unfair. So I think all of that stuff that we're very interested in, and this just marks kind of us starting to wade into the case. All right, let's get started. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is the murder of Brian Thompson, the case of Luigi Mangione.
Well, to make a very obvious point, would you agree this is a highly, highly politicized case?
Yes. And I think oftentimes when we talk about politicized cases, something comes to mind for everyone, and it's usually like, oftentimes we only say a case is politicized if we disagree with the politics being espoused around it, I think, So people who are against gun control, if a mass shooting happens and people say we need further gun control in the United States, they're saying you're politicizing a shooting, and vice versa, So usually it's meant as a criticism. I think it's actually a neutral thing that can happen, and it's not necessarily a united. In the United States of America, we have an extremely polarized binary choice of left or right. That's how it breaks down. Democrat or Republican. Democrats on the left, Republicans on the right. But to me, the politicization of a case doesn't actually necessarily need to fall within that binary paradigm. It doesn't need to mean, I guess, Republicans versus Democrats. It can be a lot more nuanced than that. And frankly, I want to say this. When we're talking about politicization of cases, crime can highlight salient issues within a society, whether that's mental health treatment or lack thereof, child abuse, domestic violence, firearms access, whatever. So I don't think it's necessarily bad or good when crime gets politicized. It just happens in certain cases. Sometimes crimes are politicized by like politicians or media figures or influencers. They come in and politicize it because they want to make a point. Other times it's just the nature of the crime or the nature of what happened or the victims or the perpetrator, right? So when we talk about politicization, I just don't think we should necessarily be critical or happy about it. Let's just talk about it like it's a neutral thing. Like, I mean, there was political violence in Reconstruction era United States in the South where you had, white supremacists attacking Black civilians and white Northerners who came down to do things. So like political violence has always existed. Let's not act like this is some new thing. And in this case, I guess it's not really that surprising that it got politicized. So, why would that be? Why would this case get politicized, Kevin?
Well, this case got politicized because the murder victim was an executive at a health insurance company. And a lot of people in this country, including, as we'll discuss, ourselves, have had some negative experience with health insurance, and they have a lot of anger towards that industry. A lot of people thought this represented justice on some level.
Yeah.
And I want to hasten to say I want us to be very honest about our biases here, and we're going to get more into this later. I have a very strong anti-murder bias.
Yes, that's our primary bias here on the murder sheet, despite the name.
Very strong anti-murder bias, and we'll get into more of that later, but I wanted to say that here at the outset.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about our own experiences. I think it would be helpful for especially non-Americans to understand, but also for folks who maybe haven't had to deal with some negative insurance experiences. I think it contextualizes some of the anger, but also we would just feel better putting our own experiences in here, just to be honest brokers. But we are going to get into sort of unpacking all of that shortly before we get into the case. But yes, this is a case that is politicized because the victim is who he is, because notably UnitedHealthcare is actually pretty controversial even within large healthcare insurance companies. So this narrative of an extremely wealthy, powerful health insurance executive getting murdered, that has resulted in a reaction that feels different than you often see, although is becoming increasingly common as true crime becomes more and more like a fandom. So we'll talk about some of that too. But the murder itself has been met with more, dare I say it, approval than you would ever expect to see, that I would ever expect to see. But
yeah, and one small indication of this in my mind is that in social media, often when people talk about this case and talk about the person accused of this crime, they refer to him by his first name, Luigi. And to me, that indicates a certain friendliness, or we like this guy a little bit. The pro Richard Allen people call him Ricky. Rex Heuermann, the person accused of being the Long Island serial killer, I don't see a lot of people saying, oh, let's see how Rex is doing. So just the little things like the fact that people call him by his first name indicate something to me.
I agree, but the difference for me with the Richard Allen truthers is they're like Gretchen Wieners in Mean Girls, like stop trying to make fetch happen. If they call him Ricky, and like most people are creeped out by that because he's just a weird little child murdering freak. Whereas with Luigi Mangione, that's mainstream. I've talked to people in my life where it's not like they're necessarily supporting murder, but they have a more affectionate tone. That's like a real thing. They have a more positive view of him. So that's all very real. And these are people I respect. These are people I think are rational. It's really more, it's permeated the mainstream significantly more than something like Richard Allen, where when people really dig into that case, they get uncomfortable with overtly supporting a child murderer. So this is different. This is actually something where you are getting a figure at the center of the case who is more akin to a folk hero for a lot of people. And we're going to get into how we're going to cover this and what is going to go into our coverage and how the tone we'd like to set for our coverage. But before we do that, I think it's important to make some disclosures, just because I would feel better. I don't know. Maybe I'm being overly scrupulous. I just think it's important to kind of be like honest about stuff. So my caveat, we both have a caveat. My caveat is that I feel very obliged to disclose that I myself have had in the past had a very problematic and bad experience with UnitedHealthcare specifically. And again, if you're not an American, this might give you some insight into how things that we go through in this country with health insurance. And also for people who maybe haven't had this experience, maybe it gives some insight into the amount of anger there is around this topic in the general public. So I was on my parents' insurance till I was 26. And the problem for me came when I was switching from their insurance to my employer's insurance. So as a result of basically what was essentially a misfiling, UnitedHealthcare began trying to charge me thousands of dollars I did not owe them because I was covered by them, and basically they were like, "Well, your new insurance has to pay with it." I won't bore you with the details, but they were wrong, and I wasn't seeking handouts. I wasn't asking for special treatment. I was simply being denied the coverage that was owed me under what they were supposed to be doing. So I kept trying to call in and explain the situation, and I would get help, and they would understand, and it'd be like, okay, it's over. And then they would start over. The whole process would start again. And this went on for months and months and months and months and months. And what's ironic is that this was the disputed charges were over mental health care. I had sought mental health care. And then I found it very ironic because I tried to get help with that, and then I was essentially being driven insane by this process. And this was at a time when I was trying to get sober, so that really was not super welcome by me. And I experienced this firsthand. So I experienced kind of a classic situation where there's some minor paperwork confusion or error, and you cannot get help. And they will and what I learned firsthand is that the goal is not to help you. The goal is to grind you down until you pay. And that's not an accident. That is by design. It's purposeful. It's meant to get you so frazzled and consume so much of your time and energy that you just give up and that you just roll over. And I refused to do that because I am extremely stubborn. And then it became basically an ordeal for me. And here's the thing. I want to note something. I was privileged enough where I was not going to be homeless or bankrupted by this issue. It would have really hurt. I mean, it would have been a lot of money and it would have really hurt. But it would not have ruined my life in the same way that it would have someone in a more precarious financial situation. But I can't even imagine what this experience would have been like had I been in a situation where that would have made the difference between me being housed or non-housed, or me being able to take care of my kids or not. Like, I can't even imagine how helpless and desperate and just horrible it would have been. I mean, I felt all those things even though the stakes weren't as high for me. And it just felt deeply unfair. And it was, I will personally never forget ever how I was treated by that company at a time in my life that was difficult because of the new sobriety. Like, that's something that's burned into my into my consciousness, and the callousness with which I was treated, not by any individual employee, all perfectly pleasant. I don't think I ever had I wasn't yelling at people. I would get along great with the rank and file people I was calling, and I maybe I'm deluding myself, but I feel like they were sympathetic to what I was dealing with. But the company as a whole, it just lasted so long. And one thing I remember, Kevin.
I remember this too. I know what you're going to say.
Okay, were we outside, because we were living in Brooklyn, were we outside the Sweet and Low factory when I said this? Because I kind of vaguely remember that mural on the side of the wall.
Yeah, oddly enough, when we lived in Brooklyn, we lived right next door to a sugar factory.
Yeah, that sounds about right for you.
And I'm not making that up. This isn't me being whimsical or anything. We literally lived right next door to a sugar factory.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was kind of cool. They had like a mural, but I remember I maybe it was inside of our apartment, but I vaguely, in my memory, I remember we were outside. We were walking Lanny, our dog, who's passed away, and I looked at you and I was like looking at the mural, and I basically said that in an ideal society, the leaders of health insurance companies would end up against a wall, meaning executed, obviously. Now, I am not a violent person, and I'm not somebody who really wants to see anyone get shot, even if they are the leader of a health insurance company. I'm just telling you that I said that because that highlights the level of anger and helplessness and fury and kind of feeling like things are unfair that I was experiencing at that time. And I wouldn't say that is like a characteristic thing that I say a lot. Is that fair to say, Kevin?
That's fair to say.
Because I will tell you, like Kevin, my big bias on this show is we are both anti-murder. We are anti-people murdering each other. We are for a society that is governed by laws and where laws are upheld and enforced in a fair and equal way, and where people, don't just go off and kill each other. When we started the Murder Sheet, we didn't really know if podcasting was even going to work out for us in the long run. Like, what if no one listens to us? That would be awkward. I'm really glad we tuned out those doubts and went for it, because it's been an absolute dream come true. But the kind of uncertainty we face is what stops people from betting on themselves, chasing their dreams, and starting their own businesses.
For all of you out there looking to kickstart your own dreams, partnering with Shopify is one of the best decisions you can make. It gets you on the right track from day one. They take the uncertainty out of business.
Shopify is your one-stop commerce platform that supports millions of businesses around the world.
Shopify makes you efficient and fast. You can upload new products, improve existing products. Shopify's AI tools can help you with product descriptions, page headlines, and better product photography.
And don't worry about nobody buying your products. They help you get the word out. Shopify puts the power of a whole marketing team behind you. You can create email and social media campaigns with just a few clicks.
Shopify supports you with inventory management, international shipping, processing returns, and more. Whatever the challenge, they're there to make things quicker and more convenient. It's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/msheet. Go to shopify.com/msheet. That's shopify.com/msheet.
Enough with overcomplicating your wardrobe. Stop buying trendy, cheap stuff that doesn't last. Curate your style with high-quality pieces that you can mix and match. Our wonderful sponsor, Quince, can help you out with that.
They are all about accessible luxury. These are the premium, everyday essentials that you can wear all the time, even as the seasons change.
We love their comfortable, lightweight Mongolian cashmere sweaters. They're perfect for spring. We're also excited to try out their linen bottoms and shorts and European jersey linen t-shirts.
Not only will you be getting high-quality clothing for less, it's also important to know that Quince only pairs with ethical factories and artisans that set rigorous standards for craftsmanship. They save you money by cutting out the middleman.
Quince's wonderful silk pieces have been some of my go-tos this year. I love their black washable silk dress and black washable silk skirt. They elevate my style while being so easy to wash and maintain and pair with other clothes.
Right now, go to quince.com/msheet for free shipping and 365-day returns. That is a full year to build your wardrobe and love it. And you will. It's now available in Canada too. Don't keep settling for clothes that don't last. Go to quince.com/msheet for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/msheet.
So I guess I'm just trying to say, like, I got to that point with this stuff where I was making comments like this. Not something I'm particularly proud of, and not something that I would ever certainly want anyone to act upon. But in a moment of frustration, that is something I said. And I just do want to clarify, though, despite going through that experience, while I would love to see people not be able to make millions of dollars off of the pain and suffering of their fellow human beings, their fellow Americans, I also don't believe that killing people is ever an effective way of dealing with anything. I really just don't. Or at least, let's say, you could say, well, self-defense. I'd say most of the time killing people is not an effective way of dealing with things, especially big societal issues here. I also do not believe that everyone who works in health insurance is evil. I don't believe that. I think most people are just working in their jobs, and the system is a problem. I think the system is a problem. Changes should be systemic, less about punishing individuals and more about trying to make things better for everybody. But I would have just felt weird covering this case if I did not share that experience because it was with this specific company.
And I should mention, I have suffered and continue to suffer from some chronic health issues. So I had a lot of stressful encounters with health insurance over the years. In addition to that, someone I love very much has suffered very severe health issues over the years. I can't really go into it much more than that without violating that person's privacy, which I'm not going to do. But dealing with health insurance has also made that very, very stressful, certainly much more stressful than it had to be. And I just want to echo what you were saying about how we are anti-murder. And I want to add, we're going to mainly be focusing, after we get through all this preamble, we're going to be focusing on the crime, especially as it moves through the courts. This is not a healthcare reform podcast. We're not qualified for that, frankly.
No.
And I think we confuse ourselves and confuse you if we tried to say, well, here's how it should be. But with that said, I think one thing we should be able to agree on, no matter what your ultimate goal for healthcare policy reform in this country is, the first step isn't going to be let's kill a guy and then we'll get what we want. You're not going to have a situation where healthcare executives are sitting in their boardrooms, smoking cigars and enjoying their riches. And they say, oh, wait a minute, a guy committed murder. Let's give all this money back to the people. That's not going to happen. It's a fantasy. This murder, like so many other murders in this country, ultimately accomplished nothing.
Right. I think that's all fair to say. And I think I do want to, I know there's a lot of throat clearing here, but I feel like it's important when we're getting into a case like this to kind of go over some of this stuff. Because I do want to go over how we would cover this. Because this is a highly politicized crime. So we wanted to get all of our internal biases out of the way there so you can have that and you can assess our coverage based on what we're saying there. And so you could hold us accountable because if you're like, Anya, I think your experience is bleeding through here, you can tell me that because now you know. So, because Kevin and I are humans. We are human beings. We have opinions on a lot of stuff. We have political opinions. We're not apolitical. We have some very strongly held political opinions. Some of those political opinions you may totally agree with. Some you may not. It just depends on your own perspective. And I've let my political opinions bleed into the show in the past. And
we usually try not to. We try to do it.
It's not overt. I don't think it's never been something like, well, I'm voting for this person. It's more of like, I think when you talk about crime, your takes on crime can influence and reveal your takes on things like social welfare, law enforcement, mental health care, the role of government in society, what we should spend tax dollars on, your view of women's rights, your view of race relations, whatever. Like your view on crime can tell us a lot about that. It is very difficult to completely separate any sort of political opinion with talk of crime because it gets in there.
But I think we're also well aware that people don't tune into the show to hear what we think about politics.
No, nor should you, because I don't feel like that's where any sort of expertise lies. And frankly, I personally hate it when suddenly something is becoming like I don't like it personally when I feel like politics are steering the wheel, where it's like that scene in that movie where it's like, I'm the captain now. Sometimes I feel like a show will start off one way and then suddenly it's like, okay, we're just like, we're in the bus in speed racing along the highway and politics are at the wheel. And I don't, even if I agree with someone, I'm like, oh, shut up,
There's a comedy podcast I enjoy. And over the years, it's become more and more about their takes on politics. Maybe I agree with those takes. Maybe I don't. That's not why I'm listening to this show.
No.
And we're aware you're not listening to this show to hear us vent about politics or health insurance.
So I guess that is one reason. And the other reason, to just try to be fair, we objectivity, as I think pure objectivity is impossible. We're all humans. I think fairness is possible and should be what we're all aiming for. And that means fairness is about trying to understand other viewpoints, be open-minded toward them, be curious rather than close-minded. That's all what I think we're going to be trying to aim for here. I really do feel, though, that especially compared to other cases we've covered, because this is so inherently politicized, the Thompson murder, a strict approach from us is required. I don't think us adding to the politicization would be helpful. I can't even say the word. I don't know how to talk today. I'm really just, my brain is mush. But I think us contributing to that would not be helpful. So much of what I've already seen in terms of discussion of this case has been highly political, and that's fine. Other people might enjoy that, and I'm not condemning anything. I'm just saying that when we're doing something, if we want to add some value, I think what we can do is sort of clear that away and really just focus on the facts, focus on what the legal filings mean, and avoid inputting our own anger or hopes or wishes or politics or whatever you want to call it, and just kind of come at it from a more sort of Spock sensibility rather than a McCoy.
Yeah, let's look at what the evidence the prosecution has, proves, what they think it can prove, the arguments the defense has against those points, whether or not the investigation against Mr. Mangione was conducted properly, whether his rights were violated or not. Let's just look at it the way we would any other murder case.
Well, I'm saying, like, with other murder cases, we might make a snarky comment about conspiracy theories. We might be a little snide, or here or there, things might bleed through. In this case, I'd really like that to not happen. I would really like to avoid that. Again, like when we're covering other cases, we can be a little opinionated. We can be a little sassy, dare I say it. I just would like to set a different tone for our coverage of this case. And
so hold us to that.
Yeah.
If you think we are slipping up and getting a snarky or political complaint.
Again, I don't regret doing that in Delphi. At a certain point, that case got so out of control that I feel like, we had to almost tell you our opinion, because we were like, this is not normal, folks. This is nuts. But
so we're going to try to just be a place on this case where you can come and get the facts with minimal spin. But again, we do have a very strong bias, which is going to bleed into this. And that bias is we are anti-murder. That doesn't mean we're anti-Luigi Mangione in this.
No.
Because he's accused of this crime. Just because I don't like murder doesn't necessarily mean I believe the prosecution has enough evidence to prove his guilt, or that the investigation was conducted fairly.
Exactly. And we can talk about the political elements as far as being dispassionate and from a different viewpoint of, like, okay, how would the jury potentially react to this if some of them have had negative experiences with healthcare? Stuff like that. So that's all the throat clearing we're going to do. I hope that helps kind of set the tone here. And now I think it might be good to start getting into some of the figures and entities that are sort of at the heart of this case. Do you want to get started with that?
Do it.
All right. So let's talk about, before we talk about Brian Thompson and Luigi Mangione, let's talk about the United Health Group. So UnitedHealthcare is the insurance arm of the company United Health Group. We're massive company. This is a massive corporation. It insures around 49 million Americans. And in 2023, they generated $281 billion in revenue. So we're talking about huge. And Brian Thompson was not the CEO of the overall United Health Group. He was the CEO of UnitedHealthcare. In 2024, this was the largest health insurer in the United States. And again, the scope of this cannot be understated. But also it's a controversial one. In 2024, in October specifically, the United States Senate Homeland Security Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations did a report, and they found that United Healthcare was doing more prior authorization denials that was spiking. And in May of 2024, there was a lawsuit against Brian Thompson and other executives for fraud and insider trading around the company.
And of course, Brian Thompson is the murder victim in this case. Can you tell us about him?
Yes. So Brian Thompson is the murder victim. He was 50 years old. And he was, I'll just kind of go into the biography that I was able to find. And this is largely from the Des Moines Register. So they did a kind of a big profile on him. So these are some just facts about, just so we can kind of get to know both him and the accused. So he was from Jewell, Iowa. And he was a sort of a star student athlete at South Hamilton High School in Iowa, graduated from there in 1993, valedictorian, homecoming king, class president. So someone who was very successful. And then he also was the valedictorian, apparently, at the University of Iowa, where he graduated with a business administration degree in 1997. He majored in accounting and, was very successful academically, was widely regarded by people to this day as a very sharp, smart businessman. So after college, he moved to Minneapolis. He worked as a certified public accountant at PwC, and he was in auditing, then went into transaction advisory services. At some point, he married a woman named Paulette Thompson, who was also from Iowa. She became Thompson when she married him, but Paulette. They had two teenage sons at this point. By the time of the murder, they were separated. By accounts from people who knew him, he was very present and involved father with his sons. He came to join UnitedHealthcare in 2004. So he was there for a long time by the time of the murder. Started out director of corporate development, became vice president, then chief financial officer of different sectors, then became the CEO of UnitedHealthcare Medicare and Retirement in 2017. 2019, switched to the CEO of the kind of their government programs section, and then became the overall UnitedHealthcare CEO in April of 2021. So he was paid apparently $10.2 million annually for this work. And his wife has claimed he was getting threats over, his work. And that's been reported widely in the media. And then also people who knew him had a positive view of him, said he was a loving person, said he was a good person. I was interested in that Des Moines Register article because there were a couple of different figures from different sides of the aisle, different political parties who were saying good things about him. So he, but obviously the role of UnitedHealthcare CEO, a controversial one in the United States. So that's who he is. That was the murder victim. Now let's talk about the accused man.
Tell us about him.
So Luigi Nicholas Mangione was 26 at the time of the murders, and he was from Towson, Maryland. His parents he was born into a large, successful Italian-American family, kind of based out of Baltimore, Maryland. And his paternal grandfather, Nicholas, was a successful businessman, had 10 kids, lots of cousins, lots of big family. And, they were kind of prominent. I don't know, prominent. I don't want to overstate it, but they were successful. His, one of his cousins, I think, was in the Maryland House of Delegates. So it was they did well. And, he, will kind of go into some of the biographical details I was able to glean, and I'll include all of our show notes. I kind of pulled from a lot of different articles, so I will kind of share those with you in the show notes if you want to kind of read on. But he was born into this family, and he claims to have gotten Lyme disease when he was 13. He also attended the all-boys private secondary school, the Gilman School in Baltimore. He was also a student athlete, wrestling, cross-country, track, soccer, and he was also really into coding. He taught himself how to code, loved video game development, and but also kind of had some health issues. Again, he's claimed that he had brain fog since high school. He's claimed that he had irritable bowel syndrome and visual snow. So dealing with some health issues, but otherwise succeeding. He ultimately went to the University of Pennsylvania. For people who are not aware, that is an Ivy League school. It's a very good school. And did robotics research internships. He was an intern at Firaxis Games. He was, he was very successful.
So living kind of a privileged life where he's being blessed enough to do work that sounds interesting and that he cared about.
Yeah. And I think, like Thompson, he was also valedictorian in high school, I believe. But did a lot of interesting things. He graduated cum laude from Pennsylvania in 2020. He had a Bachelor of Science in Engineering and Computer Engineering, also a Master of Science in Engineering in Computer and Information Science with a minor in mathematics. So, to my humanities graduate, all of that sounds pretty intense. And then went to work remotely as a data engineer for a company called TrueCar in 2020. And, went from living in the mainland in the United States to moving to Honolulu, Hawaii. So he was at a place called Surf Break for a while. This is like a co-living space in 2022. Even started a book club there. But he was also dealing with some issues. So he basically claimed to have back issues, to have injured his back surfing, maybe having some underlying health problems there too, and said he got a spinal fusion surgery in July 2023 and that it went well. So one thing it's important to note is that he was not insured by UnitedHealthcare.
It is interesting that the person he's alleged to have taken this violent action towards represented a company with whom Mr. Mangione did not have any dealings.
Right. And, not to say anything about guilt or innocence, because we've not had a trial yet. We've not seen all the evidence laid out in the proper way, nor have we heard what's going to be included, what's going to be excluded, and what the defense's counters are. But when we're looking at that, it's not as if it's a situation where someone is accused of like, oh, I'm mad at UnitedHealthcare because they're denying my claims and they're really hurting me. It would be more of something like they're the biggest, and therefore symbolically that would be what you were going to make a point. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So at some point in 2023, he leaves Hawaii and possibly does a backpacking trip in Asia, June of 2024. But, all of this so far, it's like you're not really seeing. And again, like this is we're going into the kind of the surface of this, but we can do more deep dives later on. But
yeah, if that's what you're interested in, let us know. We'll do it.
I just feel like it's important to kind of get the basic facts out there, and then we can kind of go back and go deeper. So so June 2024 is when, at the point of the timeline where he actually goes dark on social media. In July of 2024, he stops contacting his family. They're concerned enough to report him missing. His mother specifically reports him missing on November 18th, 2024 with the San Francisco Police Department, because at that point she doesn't know where he is. And that was kind of, I guess, the first place she went to. So
that is worrisome, where someone who's previously been communicating with family members just stops. That would certainly raise a lot of red flags and concerns for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary, and at that point you might be wondering, like, is he, could something bad have happened to him? So that must have been very stressful for his family. So some information that's been gleaned from like sort of media reports so far indicate that, and again, we talked about politicization, the politicizing of crimes. And I think this is important to note without any sort of condemnation or sort of input from us, but we have some inclination of possible political leanings from Mangione. He was on Twitter. I think his handle was like Pep Mangione. And what has been described in these media reports is really someone who is not really categorized as left or right. He's not someone who's like, okay, he's a straight up Republican, or, oh, he's a straight up Democrat. He seemingly did not like Donald Trump. He seemingly did not like Joe Biden.
I see a lot of that today, especially among his generation, where people don't like either side and just have their own beliefs are a mixture of both. I think that's one reason why we see some people voting for one side in one election and another side in another election.
Yeah, he doesn't really fit into one or another. And he seemingly his views seem to be way all over the map, just from what has been reported so far. Very interested in artificial intelligence.
I thought it was interesting that he posted a review of the Unabomber's manifesto.
Yeah,
on
Ted
Goodreads.
Kaczynski, and he seemed to be kind of critical of like violence. So interesting, but just kind of the parallels of someone sort of possibly being accused of taking violent action in order to influence society.
Yeah, again, no matter what you think about Mr. Kaczynski's use, no matter what you think about the Unabomber, Mr. Kaczynski's use of violence. Let me start over. No matter what you think of what he wrote in his manifesto, certainly him setting bombs off did not succeed in furthering his views or making his views more popular.
Okay.
Setting off bombs, killing people does not make you more popular.
Yeah, I would agree. You do not, under any circumstances, gotta hand it to the Unabomber to quote the Twitter account Drill. I think, yeah. But anyways, but all of this is, if you're just looking at this in a vacuum, you're just kind of like, okay, he's a guy. He's a young guy. He's kind of doing stuff, and has no criminal record. Seems intelligent. Seems successful.
And I'll say this: when I look at him and what you've said, I'm at this point. There's some alarm bells because he cut ties with his family, but he's not an unattractive guy. He seems smart, charismatic, comes from a family with resources. It seems to me that if he was interested in changing things he didn't like in the system, this was a guy that had options. He could go into politics like his relative did. He had options.
He had a lot going for him. I think he had a lot going for him. So that's kind of who, and again, we can go more in depth to Thompson or Mangione at any time, but we're just trying to get to the big high points of this.
Tell us about the murder timeline.
Yes. So the murder timeline. So we mentioned he essentially goes missing, and his family is not able to track him down, and they're already concerned about this by November 18th. November 24th is when I'm going to call this person the suspect, because again, Luigi Mangione is accused of being this person, but he's not been convicted yet, and it's possible that his attorneys will say, no, this was somebody else. So let's just call this person the suspect, okay? The suspect who murdered Brian Thompson. So November 24th, 2024, the suspect comes to New York City. They arrive via the Port Authority bus terminal. This is in Midtown Manhattan. For anyone who's not had the pleasure of being at Port Authority, it's,
It's not fun.
No. Have you ever been there?
Yeah, it's not the... If I was traveling to Manhattan or New York, I don't think that's the way.
Well, it's not glamorous.
I would choose to go.
I've been there plenty. I've traveled there, at different times, but I think it's not glamorous, but it kind of has also this, I mean, just coming, like my parents are from New York City, and like back in the day, it was considered like sketchy and dangerous. There's a lot of sex trafficking, runaways coming off the bus and getting immediately picked up by pimps.
That's what I associate.
It's not
with.
like, I don't think it's really like that anymore, or certainly not to the same extent, but it's got this kind of like reputation. But yeah, so this person arrived. To be clear, they had come in on a Greyhound bus, and they had come from the Greyhound bus had started out in Atlanta, Georgia. 7 stops en route. And that day they check into a hostel on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And when he's checking in, his face is captured on a camera behind that desk. But other than that, he's very disciplined about not revealing his face. His roommates at the hostel say he only slips down his mask when he's eating. So someone concerned about not showing their face. So that day, he also cases out the New York Hilton Midtown Hotel. A couple days later, November 29th, he checks out of the hostel. And then he comes back the next day, November 30th, checks back into the hostel. So that all kind of goes on. That's kind of the prelude to the murder, which occurs, of course, on December 4th. So at 5:31 a.m., the suspect leaves the hostel and takes an e-bike to...
Was that 534?
Yeah. What did I say?
I thought you said 531. I could be wrong.
Oh, yeah. I just don't know how to read. No, you're right. It is 534. He takes the e-bike to Midtown, and he kind of, I think he's kind of spotted near a subway stop at one point.
What's an e-bike?
I've never actually used an e-bike, but they're basically like it's it's a bike with an electrical motor, is my understanding. That kind of helps them go forward. And in New York City, you can kind of like, I think, check them out. Like there's like almost stands where they're like loaded, and I never use them.
So this isn't like a bike he had with him. This is a bike that basically anyone in the city can use if they rent it.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's laws about like, who can use them, and you can like check them out. But I think they're just publicly accessible if you have like, I don't know, maybe like an app, or there's like some payment situation that has to happen. But I've never used them. That would scare me to bicycle around New York City. I'd be scared I would get hit by a car or something. And I'm not an experienced cyclist, so it just feels like it would be a bad idea. So at some point at the Starbucks cafe on 6th Avenue, about 2 blocks away from the New York Hilton Midtown Hotel, he buys coffee, I think water, granola bars, and ultimately throws out the coffee cup and the water bottle. And then 6:30 a.m., he is seen on surveillance footage walking and talking on the phone. At 6:39 a.m., he gets to the New York Hilton Midtown Hotel, and he waits there for several minutes. And at 6:40, Brian Thompson exits the Marriott Hotel that he stayed that night and heads towards the New York Hilton Midtown Hotel. He was there for basically there was an investors meeting, an annual investors meeting that took place for United Health Group. And to be clear, Thompson had arrived there a couple of days earlier. He got there on the 2nd. So we're starting to see these guys converge. 6:44 a.m., Thompson is walking toward the Hilton Midtown Hotel, and this suspect, steps out and shoots him several times.
This is captured on video, isn't it?
It is captured on video. And you even see him, he's the gun seems to jam at one point, he racks it. And then that suspect, after shooting Thompson, he runs down a pedestrian walkway and runs. So there's a 911 call pretty quickly. Police get there within minutes, and Thompson is found shot in his leg and his back, rushed to the hospital, but he's declared dead at 7:12 a.m. in Mount Sinai Hospital. And meanwhile, the apparent suspect is seen riding a bike away from the scene, gets in a taxi, and then gets to the George Washington Bridge bus station. So this is all happening. He gets to the bus station by 7:30. So like this is all happening very quickly, early morning situation. And police find some really interesting evidence there. So I think next maybe we can talk about the evidence in this case.
Sure.
So what police find is that at the scene, and this is kind of, I think when this came out, people went nuts. Like this was like kind of like almost like people realized, because when you have something like this happen, people wonder, is this just some random thing, or was he targeted? And this kind of showed that it was targeted. There were cartridge cases recovered at the scenes, 3 specifically, and those had the words delay, deny, depose written on them.
What is the significance of those words, Miss Kane?
So basically it's a play on a phrase, delay, deny, defend. And that is when basically what people say health insurance companies do in order to not pay out claims and rack up profits.
So those words left behind indicate that this was not necessarily an attack on Brian Thompson, an individual. It was an attack on Brian Thompson, representative of an industry that the killer disapproved of.
Yes. And that's a possibility. Although early on, I imagine there's also an element of like, is it someone trying to make it look like that, even though it's a different motive? So additionally, police find a phone, a candy wrapper, a water bottle around the scene. They think that's connected to the shooter. They find what they think is the shooter's backpack at Central Park on December 6th, a couple days later. And that has Monopoly money in it. So again, kind of like playing on the big business side of things. And the New York City Police Department is primarily dealing with this, but also the Federal Bureau of Investigation is also on the case. And, they have the image of him on the CCTV at the hostel. They think he's white. They think he's young. They think he's a little bit over 6 feet tall, and that he's competent with firearms. Like, he knew what he was doing. He knew how to clear a jam in the video, and also savvy about, hey, I might be picked up by the cameras. So he was mostly very cautious with that. So that is what happens. And immediately this kind of, I think, pretty quickly sets off a bit of a media firestorm. People are like, what happened? What is this? And I remember on social media, there was kind of a bit of an attitude of like, I hope he gets away with it. Do you remember that?
I definitely remember that.
People were like rooting for like whoever this guy is. People were saying, oh, look, in the CCTV footage, he's handsome. I hope he's like a Robin Hood. I hope he gets away with it. People were like excited about this. Not everyone, but I mean, I think more so than most cases that you see. So the arrest of Mangione took place on December 9th, 2024, so a couple of days later. And this was all the way in Altoona, Pennsylvania at a McDonald's there. And what has been put out there, by media and by the police is, what the police are saying at this point is that a McDonald's employee called the police to say that they believe they recognized the suspect from this major national news story. And police arrive and they detain Mangione, and he is ultimately arrested. There's going to be some legal debate over whether or not this arrest and seizure of his possessions and detainment was handled properly. And we're not going to get into that yet, but let's put a pin in that.
Just flagging it, yeah.
Yeah. And he's arrested, and ultimately, I'll go over some more of the evidence that they say that the prosecution says connects Mangione to the crime. And again, this is not necessarily what's going to be at trial, depending on pretrial motions, things like that. But this is just what the prosecution is saying. So they say that Mangione's fingerprints match items near the crime scene, namely a cell phone, a water bottle, and a Kind Bar wrapper. There have been claims from police about having DNA. There are the 3 9mm shell casings at the scene. And when in Altoona, when police search Mangione's backpack, they find a 3D printed 9mm ghost gun and a 3D printed suppressor with a loaded magazine. And police say that the gun and the suppressor are consistent with the 9mm shell casings that were obviously used with the murder weapon. So they're linking the 9mm to, that he had with what was found at the scene. Additionally, his backpack seized at Altoona had a red spiral notebook in it, which officers have described as a manifesto of sorts, and a separate document within that, outside of the notebook, where at least partially gets into healthcare, claims that maybe even said something about whacking a healthcare executive. So, yeah. He also had a fake New Jersey driver's license that had a fake name on it, and that was the same name, Mark Rosario, as the man who bought a bus ticket to New York and checked into the hostel. So, yeah.
And so some of this evidence, correct me if I'm wrong, was found in his backpack.
Yes.
When he was arrested. And the defense is claiming that search was improper.
That's right.
Why do they say that?
They're saying that the officers started to search it at the McDonald's before a formal warrant was even, a thing. So without a warrant, and there have been, like long suppression hearings that are just about this issue, because obviously it's very important.
And we can just talk about it very briefly now. If people are interested, we can do an entire episode on it. But it's important to recognize that the government has so much power in these situations. The government can take away our liberty. They can take away our life. So we really have to put checks on it. And there are certain rules or checks on how and when police officers can do searches. And if they don't follow those rules appropriately, the evidence can be tossed out and not allowed to be used at trial. And in some instances, that can be frustrating because the prosecution can lose evidence that may prove a person's guilt and not be able to use it. But the thinking is, if you allow materials from an illegal search to come in, basically you are encouraging illegal searches in other cases. There needs to be some sort of penalty, the argument goes, in order to discourage illegal searches and to protect our liberties. So even though it can be very, very frustrating if it is found that the search was illegal, it's certainly possible it might be thrown out.
Yeah. And at this point, the judge has taken that under advisement, and, there has not been a decision about that multi-day suppression hearing. One thing,
and certainly that evidence, if thrown out, would weaken the case, but it seems like they have other stuff too.
I concur. That's not, it would definitely significantly weaken the case though, but there are other things. I think when it comes to this, it's a little bit complicated because there's essentially two cases. So you have the federal prosecution, and then you have the state prosecution. So there's the New York State Court that is trying him, and then also the Southern District of New York Federal Court is trying him. And the prosecutors want the state to go first, and the defense wants the federal prosecutors to go first because they say that that's the death penalty case. Because the federal prosecution has brought up the death penalty. So he's on multiple charges in Manhattan, murder, terrorism, a lot of different counts, weapons charges. In federal court, it's just 4 counts: murder through use of a firearm, and additional firearms offenses. So, one thing that did happen though is the New York judge actually threw out two of the state terrorism-based murder counts. So, saying basically statutorily these do not meet the terrorism requirements, but ordinary murder is still on the table there. United States Attorney General Pam Bondi has basically okayed it for federal prosecutors to seek the federal death penalty on murder through use of a firearm. And the defense is obviously pushing back on that and saying that Bondi was tied to a lobbying firm that represented UnitedHealthcare and therefore has the conflict of interest here. So there's a lot of controversy with that. The fact that the death penalty could be on the table is certainly controversial. And yeah, so I mentioned the suppression fight. There's been a lot of accusations from the defense about the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, accessing Mangione's medical records in an inappropriate way, and all just various. It's been controversial, but there's been a lot of legal drama around it. And his defense attorney is Karen Friedman Agnafilo, and she's been kind of the big figure associated with the defense. And then he's being tried by the federal and the state prosecutors. So I guess we can always go back and go into like a lot of the legal ramifications back and forth in more depth at some point. But
so it might be worth doing an entire episode on the suppression hearing when the judge makes the decision.
Yeah, I agree. Because I'll be very interested, and that could really set the tone for the case about, are the prosecutors losing some things? Or are they kind of being okayed to go with it? It just depends.
It might also be interesting. We're just getting started with this case, so I'm throwing out some ideas. If you have other ideas out there you'd like to see us cover, please let us know. I would be interested in other cases where the death penalty has been sought. Does this seem like those, or does it seem like there is some sort of political reason why it's being sought in this case? I honestly don't know the answer to that, but that might be interesting.
Yeah. Some people have accused that of being a political issue where it's like, why this case and not others?
I'm also curious because I'm curious to actually see the writings in the backpack. All we have is the prosecution's characterization of them. I believe the defense indicates that they might characterize them in a different way. But certainly if we're to believe that he killed the healthcare executive because of his feelings about health insurance, and he feels that health insurance has reached such an evil point in this country that killing the executives is justified, then why is he fighting this? Why doesn't he just stand up and say, here's why I did it. I believe this system is so evil.
Yes, and I think there was the leak of Luigi Mangione's journal that did come out in the media, so people can read those. And I think the defense's contention is that it's not a manifesto. It's more innocuous than that. So yeah, you have the defense's side being different, but I think I think at least a bunch of that has come out already. But, it's going to be something where I'll be curious to see how this all plays out. I mean, it is worth noting something, though. This case has continued to be very high profile. And I think, how do I say this? The kind of initial tenor of this kind of suspect being a folk hero has transferred over to Mangione. He has been the subject of a lot of internet attention, a lot of fundraising done on his behalf. And when I look at this case, I see it as such a clear-cut instance of what we talked about with Monia Ali of Fandom Exile, a great Substack that you guys should check out. She talked to me a while ago about the fandomification of true crime, where you have, fandoms would typically be something like, we love this band, or we love this TV show, or we love this movie, or we love this sports team. And this is very much within that, because you have an element of Luigi Mangione being perceived as an attractive young man, a handsome young man. And you have a lot of kind of, how do I say this? Sexualization, I guess, of him as an individual. Kind of people commenting on his appearance, people commenting on their own sexual or romantic feelings towards him, and kind of that outpouring around that you really kind of more associate with people being really into a boy band they like, or a K-pop band or something like that, where, this guy's so handsome and great, but we're actually talking about a man accused of murder instead of a singer that people admire. So I think that's been really interesting to see. And it's not just, comments about what he's wearing or how he's dressed, or his him having a certain expression in the courtroom. That's been something that has been really overt. And to be clear, I don't think that everyone who's interested in this case is interested in that at all. I think there's different subsets of people who follow this case, it seems like, and that's just one of it. And you do see some, I don't want to say conspiracy theories, because without getting more into this case, I don't want to be dismissive of any claims too early on, but you have a lot of kind of certainly skepticism towards the prosecution and the police, and that goes from kind of the just, hey, maybe his rights were violated, to the FBI has secret surveillance technology that was used to spy on the McDonald's and therefore identify Luigi, and the whole thing with the person calling in a tip is a ruse. So you have kind of like the one side of that that's kind of more within what you'd see every day, and then something that's like, you know, more extreme, I guess. Like, I would not want to conclude that happened without seeing some pretty extensive evidence of that, I guess. But yeah, trying to be neutral when I talk about it.
Choosing your words very, very carefully.
So,
I'm sitting here watching. I can see the strain on your face.
You know, when I'm slowing down, then I'm like, geez, I'm trying to like, you know, trying to ease into the curve here, the icy curve.
I've not been a close student of the case, so
I'm only just getting into it.
So some of the writings have leaked, you said?
Yes, yeah.
Did you read them? Do they seem like a manifesto?
It's, I guess I feel like that's such a loaded term that I think if we ever wanted to do a deep dive onto what was published,
she's choosing her words carefully again.
I would want to almost like unpack it as its own thing rather than just kind of say manifesto obviously is a loaded term, because when you have a manifesto, you probably did something, you know, pretty extreme, whether it was good or bad or whatever. So it's interesting. I find it interesting. I find it, it's not necessarily the most overt thing in the world, but there's some things that would raise a red flag with me about someone possibly being connected to the murder of Thompson.
And when it comes to the McDonald's employee calling him in and whether or not that's a ruse, it just occurs to me that I would expect, if I was that McDonald's employee, I would not want a lot of information to come out about that incident and my role in it, because I recall there was a lot of negative feeling towards that employee, because again, a lot of people see Mr. Mangione as a hero, and so they see that McDonald's employee is a villain. And so if information about that is being withheld to the extent that people are conspiracy theorizing about it, I understand that.
Right. There's definitely been a range of reactions, and I think some are overt conspiracy theories that I don't really see evidence for or seem like largely based on conjecture. And then others are more within the realm of like, oh, are his rights being violated? Is everything going properly? Which seems more standard for me and sort of something that's more like, okay, let's look into that. So this is, so I'll read you a portion of what, you know, he wrote, I guess, or what he's said to have written.
And I'll react in real time.
I can just read the whole thing. This has been published in media outlets. So, quote, "To the feds, I'll keep this short because I do respect what you do for our country. To save you a lengthy investigation, I state plainly that I wasn't working with anyone. This was fairly trivial, some elementary social engineering, basic CAD, lots of patience. And a lot of patience. The spiral notebook, if present, has some straggling notes and to-do lists that illuminate the gist of it. My tech is pretty locked down because I work in engineering, so probably not much info there. I do apologize for any strife or of traumas, but it had to be done. Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. A reminder, the U.S. has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly 42 in life expectancy. United is they can't read this part, largest company in the U.S. by market cap, behind only Apple, Google, Walmart. It has grown and grown, but has our life expectancy? No. The reality is these, again, can't read this, have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it. Obviously, the problem is more complex, but I do not have space, and frankly, I do not pretend to be the most qualified person to lay out the full argument. But many have illuminated the corruption and greed, e.g. Rosenthal Moore, decades ago, and the problems simply remain. It is not an issue of awareness at this point, but clearly power games of play. Evidently, I am the first to face it with such brutal honesty." It's not really quite coming out and saying anything, but it's certainly highly salient.
It's certainly highly suggestive. I find it interesting in there that he indicates that he's not really qualified. Other people understand it better than him.
I am interested too. What most interests me about this, though, and this is kind of something that also plays into the culture around the case, at least as far as I've observed so far, is he's saying something, again, there's the kind of side of things where people are like, well, maybe this was planted on him. Let's just for a moment just set that aside and say if this is something that is indeed linked to Mangione, not even saying if it'll be allowed in trial or not, but if we're talking about it outside of court in a way that's just we're analyzing it.
Understood. We're assuming this is authentic.
This is authentic and it is linked to Mangione. He's very overt in saying this needs to be done. It's brutal, but it has to be done. This can continue. We're being harmed. We're being exploited. Americans are being exploited. Someone has to do something. So there's that. But of course,
but he never explicitly says what this refers to. If maybe he's talking about a protest, a literal protest. He's never saying this. He never says shooting an executive has to be done. He says this has to be done.
Yeah, he said people had it coming. He apologizes for the trauma. He's addressing the feds directly. But Mangione himself has pled not guilty.
Yeah.
In both cases in the state and federal court. So that's what's kind of interesting to me in the sense that I'm not saying this doesn't really affect my view on the case or anything as much as more like it's interesting that there's kind of a folk hero thing around this. How do I say this? You if you're going to do something and make a political point, owning that would what you would assume would be a big part of that. Like if I'm going to do something and be like, I'm doing this to prove a point, backtracking and saying, no, it wasn't me, or I'm not guilty is just interesting.
It's interesting. And what I'm going to try to do during this, maybe you've heard some of it now, is I'm going to try to bend over backwards to give Mr. Mangione every benefit of the doubt. And I do that because I think it's appropriate to make the prosecution prove things.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I just find it interesting to kind of, I don't know, again, if you're trying to make a political point and then you're saying I didn't do it, you're kind of undermining the political point to a certain extent. But what I've seen when I've seen people on the side of things with this case where I feel like there's maybe some conspiratorial thinking going on, I see two things. I see people who sincerely seem to believe that and think that he's being framed or he's a fall guy or the FBI is hiding technology that's spying on us all in McDonald's, all sorts of things like that. So you do see that. And I'm not going to comment whether I agree or not. That's just something I'm observing. Then you also see what I characterize as kind of almost people being a bit facetious, people being a bit wink, wink, like, oh, no, he couldn't have done it because we were on a date, like that kind of thing. And there's almost this kind of we're going to discard what is likely. We're going to discard what we think, what we really kind of would have to kind of some kind of reality-based thinking and kind of go with conspiracy theories because we are rooting for Luigi Mangione and we are hoping that he is not ultimately convicted of this crime. We want him to succeed. And that's where we kind of get into the fandomification because it's maybe if you're a big Taylor Swift fan, you want to play her songs a lot or do things to help her songs triumph on the Billboard charts. And in this case, there's almost an element like that, but it's about a murder case where it's I wish the best for him and I'm going to even say things or think things in a way that maybe benefits him because I'd like him to get away with this.
If it makes it to trial, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I remember after the arrest, we live in central Indiana. We would see people with T-shirts with his face on it, indicating their support. I haven't seen those in a while, and I think it's because the story has kind of receded from the front pages. But if it goes to trial, it'll be back on the front pages again. I imagine it'll be a big issue once again.
Here's the thing that I will be curious about, because I think this is relatively rare. And I remember when we covered the Delphi case, we felt that the closing argument made by Brad Rosie in that case was essentially an attempted jury nullification, where can you before we go into this, maybe just say a little bit about jury nullification and sort of what that is?
Basically, it's when the defense attorney says, well, maybe he did this, but circumstances are such that to make a statement, you should find him innocent anyway.
And what we said at the time, and I remember even like leaving that session, was like, that is an insane thing to pull in a case that is the murder of 2 children for sexual reasons.
Yeah,
like,
Rosie's argument was Mr. Allen was treated badly, in my view, while he was incarcerated. Therefore, you should find him not guilty of murder.
That is not going to work in an emotionally charged case where the jury has spent days looking at the brutally murdered bodies of 2 little girls.
In this case, a defense attorney, in theory, could say, well, any of us who have been through a bad experience with health insurance understand this. We have to make the health insurance executives understand how serious this is. Find him not guilty.
I don't even think you need to be that explicit. I think that health insurance is so controversial in this country, is all you need is one person to hang it, or all you need is a jury that's like, you know what? No, like we're not, I think that's a possibility. It really depends on a lot of things. It depends on jury selection. It depends on what's going on and the performances of both the defense and the prosecution. I'm not saying that's a likely or I'm not saying it's likely. I'm not saying anything about the likelihood. I'm just saying I think it's certainly more in the realm of possibility than with a lot of different cases where you could have a jury say, you could have a jury hold a murder case to perhaps like a higher standard than they would a case that doesn't have such controversial and polarizing politics. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
They could almost be like, well, he didn't admit to it on camera while tap dancing, and therefore we can't find him guilty. And that I could see that happening with aspects of this. Again, not necessarily. And, I'm not even going to comment on the strength or weakness of the case against him at this point because it's just too early and we don't know all that's going to go into what the jury is hearing. But I'm also not going to necessarily if there's things that seem like conspiracy theories that there's evidence for, then that's certainly interesting and we'll talk about that. But without there being some evidence for some of this stuff that I've seen in the kind of the social media discussions, I kind of don't even want to touch some of that because it's I don't know, let's deal with what we're dealt. I would love to know from our audience though, what are you interested about with this case? Has there been stuff you've seen that you're like, hey, is this true or not? Or what would happen with this? We'd really love to get your feedback on what you would want to know because I think this is going to be a case that's going to be interesting to follow. It raises a lot of issues about American society, but also kind of the fandomification of true crime and, what that can look like. But yeah. Anything else from you, Kevin?
That's it.
I'll include a link to all my articles that I cited from this in our show notes, but I'm sure there's a ton of stuff we barely scratched the surface on this case. This was meant to just really be a primer to kind of get us into it, and we can kind of be directed by you, the audience, going forward. So please, either in our Facebook group or, email us, just let us know what you would love to know more about or what you would love clarified or just have a discussion on different issues raised by the case. I think that would be super interesting, but we really appreciate you all listening, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com patreon.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
Shh. Enjoy your roomy seat as we get you to your destination in pure peace and quiet. Plan your relaxed ride in the quiet car at Amtrak.com. Amtrak. Retrain travel.